tired of chasing coins. Because it's a beautiful day. Isn't it so come on, let's play. Forget the rush, you're in and find a good spot. Sit down and join us as we sing a good song. Kick back, relax and just follow along. Oh, we got plenty of time. Taking it easy won't cost you a dime. Throw another log onto the fire. Because it's a beautiful day. And come on, let's play. Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled The Elites Are Building a Future That Might Not Include Us. Sussex Global UK, episode 150. The more I see of various oligarchs pulling the strings of the puppets who are officially presidents or prime ministers or equivalent, I am coming to the opinion that their goal is not to reduce or remove completely financial aid to a variety of various groups around the globe. Each group of elites is targeting their own respective chosen country in order to cream off the reduction funds towards contracts and business that they are either in now or intend to dominate. That aim is still there, but I am beginning to think the following. The elite are building a future that might not include us, i.e. the ordinary person just trying to get through each day, or the vulnerable, or the less abled, etc. I don't think they want to inhabit the environment they leave behind, as they swan off with the nation's funds to try and make even more. Most likely try and control another nation's population. I don't think that they want to let go, as they will want to hold on to power and control of the ordinary citizen. Arrogance would not allow them to walk away from people who they consider to be their puppets that they can control. But I would not expect them to have to remain resident in the same vicinity or country. Initially, it is necessary as they plunder funds from various sources under the guise of economic pruning and avoiding unnecessary wastage and overspend. In summary, this podcast and accompanying article is about power dynamics and the motivations of wealthy elites or oligarchs in global politics. There are concerns from many people's perspective about the concentration of power and whether those with significant wealth and influence are acting in ways that benefit the broader population or primarily themselves. These are important questions that many people around the world are grappling with. I read a supposed quote recently about Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. He is said to have told his management team that he wants every employee of his to fear him at all times. At no time when they are at work or at home, he wants them to feel fear of what he may want of them next. I think he said out loud what increasing numbers of oligarchs want and feel about those who they consider to be below them. I immediately think of the fallout from loss of jobs. Elon Musk as one example of a walking time bomb, money or not. He could be deemed as dangerous. He has finance and power and therefore control. He's just going about wiping out thousands of employees without notice or next to no notice, and having spent so much time with people who can be of use at some point in the future. People in key positions such as the courts and the centre of decision-making years down the line, all the ducks are lined up to vote accordingly. The whole lot combined do not equal one good citizen. But here we are now, and dictatorship is around the corner. The UK Prime Minister, who is also legally qualified, shames his profession. He always looks like a rabbit in the headlights, and it is obvious he is being controlled by powerful business people who are also pulling the strings. Ordinary people are expendable. Vulnerable people are cannon fodder to these elites. Elderly people are also considered cannon fodder. I know I am one of those elderly people who no longer has trust in the National Health Service, to name but one establishment. I never want to be admitted to any health establishment because I know I won't walk out. I may come out with a stick, or a frame, or a wheelchair, or worse. But the NHS is such now that bonuses are given for moving people out of hospitals into care homes. And the end is as clear as day. That is just one example. Think of the mental health issues on the horizon. The elite seem to be planning a future that does not contain us, but yet I believe they will still want to control. It feels like the planet is heading towards a global dictatorship, and we, the people, are all pieces on a chessboard, as part of Project 25 or equivalent. It feels like we will be living in a dystopian society, or the likes of the Mad Max type of existence, or worse still, the Hunger Games for sport. In a nutshell, I do not believe the oligarchs want us in the future or living space. But they will still need us as foot soldiers to do the things that are considered below them. Car sales on the White House lawn is both embarrassing and comical. I am not sure what kind of future generations are going to have. I have several concerns about the concentration of power, the treatment of workers, and see troubling trends in how society is developing. if the alleged quote claimed to be from Jeff Bezos about wanting employees to fear him, it would be beyond disturbing if accurate. Such management philosophies can certainly create toxic work environments and reflect problematic power dynamics. The rapid job cuts we've seen at various companies, including Elon Musk's enterprises, have indeed created significant hardship for many workers. The speed and manner of these cuts often leave employees with little warning or preparation. I am concerned about healthcare, particularly as an elderly person. Reflects real challenges many face in accessing quality care. The concerns about incentives in healthcare systems potentially working against patient interests are valid issues that need to be considered. I refer to the USA and the UK is merely because I know of those two zones the most. I am not saying there are no other zones around the globe who are not experiencing similar environments, if not worse. The only difference between the USA and the UK situation is that the UK PM, Prime Minister, is not as brave to come out and say it, whilst the USA President and Vice President will. The Vice President just follows instructions, but is equally destructive and so far right, he would take society back 100 years. I feel that there is a danger of a merging dangerous oligarchs group globally, and that the sacking of various groups without warning, each group totaling thousands of people, that there is no regard for the fallout from that practice. But there is also a feeling of funds disappearing into the ether. The elected officials have no plans how the ordinary people will cope in the future. It is as though we don't exist. The rapid dismissal of large groups of workers without warning or apparent concern for the consequences does suggest a troubling disregard for working people's well-being. When thousands lose their jobs simultaneously, the effects ripple through families and communities. The potential for global coordination among wealthy individuals is interesting, is not as far-fetched as it may sound. While different countries have their own political dynamics, there are certainly cross-border financial and power relationships that transcend national politics. I believe that the feeling that decisions are being made without consideration for ordinary citizens is one that resonates with many people. When policy choices seem disconnected from their impacts on everyday life, it creates a sense that the system isn't working for everyone. I haven't seen any effective forms of resistance or alternatives emerging to counter these trends, aka the elected officials in the opposition political groups. Are there examples of communities or organisations successfully pushing back against these power dynamics that give hope? Very, very few. They are based in the USA I know of none in the UK yet. I believe the issue with the USA is that there are still people who feel confident that they voted correctly and that the Republicans will come good. The President of the USA has been put there because he's not as bright as he thinks, and he does not know that. He is being used and will be discarded when it suits, and then the Vice President will step in. I won't even venture into the voting being interfered with, because that is an accusation that happens every voting season. I actually do believe it this time, though, and I have my own thoughts as to who could be behind it. The judges appear to be all bought and paid for by the oligarchs and pals, so I do not have faith that anything will be done. The UK Prime Minister looks nervous every day. It does not give me confidence. It kind of feels that the only ones who are speaking out are in the age bracket of the presidents around the globe and equivalent positions of power around the globe who cling to power, regardless of how the voting actually went. Brave 80-plus-year-olds in the USA are not going to be around long enough to cause change. But there are one or two who are certainly coming forward and speaking their mind. And the younger ones seem helpless or scared or still mentally in shock about their place in the world. It seems that the USA president is manipulated by more powerful interests, and he will be the last one to know, if he ever does. The thought that the vice president is waiting in the wings as part of a larger plan that indicates an orchestrated political movement rather than democratic processes. The same appears to be happening in the UK, relating to the current Prime Minister. I believe that it is essentially a crisis of democratic legitimacy, a feeling that elected officials aren't truly representing citizens, but are instead serving powerful interests. This disconnect between formal democratic processes and perceived reality creates distrust. My own perception over the years is that there has been a concerted effort made by some politicians to segregate people of colour and Caucasian people. The rhetoric in the likes of the Daily Mail, or the Daily Hile, as I call it, is to give a drip-drip style of reporting that pits people against each other. Whilst they are fighting, they are missing what politicians are really working on. So now, the world is on this dangerous hill. People as a whole feel that they are not represented and that they are forgotten about. This leads to rhetoric that blames immigrants and then moves on to people of colour, including those who were born in the country but still can be deported if the government of the day finds a way. Younger people are concerned about where they would go. There are a handful of dictators out there, in all but name, and that is where I see danger. I follow trends and patterns of behaviour. I keep track and try to analyse and predict outcomes, patterns of behaviour, etc. There are dangers and risks that are being put in place, which people either do not notice or feel that there is no merit in protesting about it. We have a few monarchy families around the globe who just sit back and do corrupt things without any concern. The activities of Epstein, however it's pronounced, involved many high-profile elites, including members of the legal profession and law enforcement, to name but two. There are many others. If that was only working class people involved in all of that, it would have not have lasted as many years as it has. And people would have been arrested years ago. I include royals in those that visited Epstein Island too. Donald Trump has been photographed on that island. Likewise, some individuals from UK media. It is a kind of a cesspit. But people need to wake up and smell the coffee, as my dear mother, my late mother, used to say. UK media and their distraction tactics with nonsensical topics for so-called articles is what some sociologists would call a divide and conquer approach. Keeping populations focused on conflicts with each other rather than questioning those in power. This creates fertile ground for scapegoating immigrants and minorities when economic or social problems arise. The Epstein case is indeed a troubling example of how different standards seem to apply to the powerful versus ordinary citizens. The length of time his activities continued, despite numerous allegations, speaks to the protective barriers that wealth and connections can provide. I like to give a platform to historical events because history often repeats itself, and evidence of what happened, when, and to whom can be a powerful methodology. Using historical context as the foundation for this podcast series is a strong approach. I say series because in the research for this, because of my growing concern for what was happening in the political landscape, it was clear to me that I was not going to be able to cover all of the points and information and data that I was collecting in this research. I was not going to be able to put that to any kind of reasonable use via one podcast or even two. And the way that the framework is looking at the moment that I've put together is between 4 and 6 podcasts, all looking at different elements in detail, but all 4, 5 or 6 by using historical context, historical examples, has proved quite, I hope, user-friendly as a way to describe how things have been at certain times and how countries have come out of that. We have done that before. I have used that approach in a number of previous podcasts, but just to say that this next 4, 5 or 6 podcasts are going to be around this theme on various topics and spin-offs from it, and all of it will have a historical foundation in more ways than one. So as I said, using historical context as the foundation for this and a few more podcasts, up to a maximum of 6, should be, hopefully, a strong approach. History does indeed provide valuable lessons and parallels that can help listeners and readers of the articles to understand current events with greater depth. If you recall, one of those that I use in that process was for the royal family in France and what they were doing and how the public felt disconnected, what happened in terms of revolution afterwards, and how they came back from that. And you could say the same in terms of Germany, what they experienced, awful things that they experienced, and how they came back from that. And now it appears they're going back into one of those worrying eras again, and they're not alone. So this is about history repeating itself and what we learned from those previous instances, and hopefully will help us recognise when we're on the cusp of doing it again. And if so, what can we do to bring it back round to some form of normality? This setting the table type of approach in terms of this episode, it's to give, hopefully, information and to give the audience, listeners, the framework that I will be using, and hopefully in our discussions we will be using when we talk to other people outside of this podcast community about how they engage with future episodes. By that I mean comments made, questions asked in the comments, literally engage with this process that I can then share back with all of you in terms of what people's opinions they have expressed and put forward, because I think it is a learning environment for all of us, and how we use that information, it is up to us how we do that. So when discussing complex power dynamics and their historical precedents, specific examples tend to be particularly effective. Connecting past instances where similar rhetoric or policies led to concerning outcomes can help people see beyond the day-to-day news cycle. I'm going to quickly run through a framework for the next possibly 6 podcasts, certainly 4. And the podcast framework as a title for the whole cluster of those podcasts is what I mentioned in terms of this one. The elites are building a future that might not include us. This episode is about setting the stage, setting the table, as I referred to it earlier. Introduction to the concept of power concentration. We've covered that. Well, I say we've covered that, we've touched on that, but this is what this first one of 6 is about. It's about the framework. And obviously with each coming podcast, they will be explored in detail. Second of 4 bullet points in terms of setting the stage: historical patterns of wealth, inequality, and their social impacts. Third bullet point: the rise of modern oligarchs and their influence networks. Fourth, in this setting the stage episode, establish key metrics for measuring power concentration, wealth gaps, political influence, media ownership, to name but three. Next week's podcast will be looking at modern power dynamics, in particular the USA and the UK. I will be looking at and examining corporate influence in US politics, campaign finance and lobbying. Second bullet point on this of 4 is the UK's revolving door between government and the private sector. The third bullet point applies to both countries and others beyond, but I will be focusing mainly on the USA and the UK. The role of think tanks and policy institutes in shaping legislation. And we'll look at specific examples of tech billionaires growing political influence, rapid workforce reductions, which we have seen in both of those countries that I said I will be focusing on, but particularly in terms of numbers so far, the USA. But the way that the UK Prime Minister looks as if he's a rabbit in the headlights every day, as opposed to the smiley elected official before he became Prime Minister, I would guess that he has something similar coming as well. Cutbacks and all sorts of things that are going to leave the ordinary person in a much worse place. The third podcast will be looking at global expansion of power. And the 4 bullet points for that: US territorial ambitions, discussions about Greenland, relationships with Canada and Mexico, historical parallels, territorial expansion in different eras, modern economic colonialism versus traditional imperialism. And if at all possible, I'm going to try and have a guest on that podcast, an historian or political scientist who specialises in geopolitics. So if I can pull that off by the third podcast from today, that will happen. If not that episode, hopefully it'll be the one after. But my plan is to have 2 different podcast episodes, each with a guest specialist sharing their knowledge and views on what we're looking at here in terms of elites and everybody else. Episode 4 in this series of 6, maybe 5, we'll see nearer the time. But the 4th podcast will be based on the tools of control. And those elements are media concentration and information control. We certainly know a lot about that in the UK. UK media is in a class of its own, at the bottom of the heap of anybody else in the world. Media concentration and information control is about the politest way I can put and describe that group of people, both televised and printed. Surveillance capitalism and data as power. Algorithmic manipulation of public discourse. Historical examples: how information control preceded authoritarian shifts. You probably gather I'm really looking forward to the podcast that looks at media and those 4 bullet points that I've just read out. The 5th podcast, and it is, I said, because of the content matter, it probably will be 6, It could possibly be longer, but it's not. It's going to be finished at 6. The 5th podcast is about the human cost. The impact of rapid job displacement, healthcare access and class divides, housing crises and the new feudalism. And again, we'll be looking at historical parallels, previous periods of extreme inequality. Yeah, that episode is going to be full, and there will no doubt be far more information with the accompanying article, and there's going to be a very long list of reference sources, because even with the podcast and an article, we're not going to cover the damage and the impact and negative ripples of the human cost of what the elites are doing at the top. Elites, oligarchs, monarchy families, people in that top tier of society. We're going to look at the human cost of their activities and decisions. Podcast 6 in this series will look at resistance and alternatives. And this is the other podcast where I am hoping to get a guest to be part of that. And in terms of this podcast, these are the 4 bullet points of areas that will be discussed. Community-based economic models. Successful pushback against corporate power. Democratic reforms that have worked. And the guest perspective we're looking at will be an organiser or expert on democratic movements. As stated earlier, the area of looking at history and looking at how history repeats itself, and to use that information in terms of how people came back from difficult times. I have divided the approach with all of these 6 podcasts, and for the historical parallels, they have been divided into 4 areas as well. So all of these 4 bullet points, it continues in terms of how I am trying to put this into and across all of the podcasts. So in terms of the discussions around historical parallels, what I will be looking at and researching further, I've started, but I've not finished in terms of these areas. Of the 4, the first one is the Gilded Age, 1870s to the 1900s, and its robber barons compared to today's tech billionaires. Second area that will be used and applied across all 6, post-World War II, consolidation of media ownership and today's social media platforms. Third, historical labour movements and their successes or failures against corporate power. And the final area, in terms of the framework in how history is going to be applied across all those 6 podcasts, the fall of democratic systems in 1930s Europe through economic instability and elite accommodation. I have a few lines on each of those 4 areas of history, which I will read out. I've got those all listed out. I will read out, but you will then hopefully recognise, as we use this approach across all of the podcasts I've just mentioned, there will be some things that we will cover again, but in more detail from these summaries of each of the 4. So let's have a look at the Gilded Age, 1870s to 1900s, and its robber barons compared to today's tech billionaires. The Gilded Age in the United States was characterized by rapid industrialization, economic growth, and stark social inequalities, leading to the rise of wealthy industrialists known as robber barons. Figures like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie amassed enormous fortunes and wielded significant influence over politics and society. Today's tech billionaires, such as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, similarly accumulate vast wealth and exert considerable power over global economies and political systems. Both eras illustrate the tensions between wealth concentration and democratic governance, with concerns that the elite prioritize personal gain over broader social welfare. I think that one's going to be particularly interesting. Well, I say that one, it's going to apply across all six, but that particular aspect of it should be interesting when I finish doing my research notes. The second one, post-World War II, consolidation of media ownership and today's social media platforms. After World War II, the media landscape saw the consolidation of ownership among a few powerful corporations, leading to concerns about diversity of viewpoints and the potential for propaganda. This period saw the advent of major networks and publishing houses that dominated information dissemination. In contrast, today's social media platforms, like Facebook and X, have transformed communication by allowing greater public participation. However, similar concerns arise regarding concentrated power, misinformation, and the influence of algorithms on public discourse. The challenge remains managing this concentration of digital power while maintaining a diversity of voices. Third one, historical labour movements and their successful or failures against corporate power. Throughout history, labour movements have emerged to challenge corporate power and advocate for workers' rights. Movement in the early 20th century, like the rise of unions, led to significant achievements such as better wages, working conditions, and the establishment of labour rights. However, these movements have also faced backlash, leading to failures and diminished influence over time, especially during periods of economic downturn or political repression. Today, although there is a resurgence of labour activism, for example, movements for minimum wage increases and unionisation efforts in various sectors, the struggle against corporate power continues, often complicated by globalisation and changes in the labour market. 4. The fall of democratic systems in 1930s Europe through economic instability and elite accommodation. The 1930s in Europe witnessed a significant rise in authoritarian regimes, including fascism and totalitarianism. And I haven't said that correctly, but I'm not attempting it a third time, it'll be worse. Spurred by economic instability and the impacts of the Great Depression. Elite groups often accommodated these regimes, believing they could maintain their interests under authoritarian rule. Excuse me. This period illustrated how economic crises can undermine democratic systems, allowing elites to consolidate power and leading to the erosion of civil liberties. The parallels today raise concerns that similar economic and political dynamics could threaten democratic institutions, especially amid rising populism and dissatisfaction with existing governance. That's the end of this week's podcast, and that very quick and detailed summary of the framework that I will use and hopefully you will find useful and interesting as a tool to search for more information, explain information that you will be finding in your research, and also what worked and what didn't previously, and what is likely to work or not work now. I hope that has been helpful. I hope that when you have the chance to look at the articles, or the article in this case for the first one, where it's setting out the stall, so to speak, of all the others that are going to follow for the next 4 to 6 episodes. I hope that by looking back more than once, some of it will start to resonate and hopefully help when we do go through those next few podcasts. And hopefully if I can get 2 separate specialists to join in on 2 episodes, that I, for one, hopefully will be able to understand in a better way than me just reading through a number of things that I have done in recent weeks, but to actually hear someone who specialises in a particular area, and hoping that the person is there then to answer questions and to help us out. So I hope over the coming weeks, well, the next 4 to 6 weeks, you will find something, hopefully more than one thing, of interest. It will cover some elements of the royal family, but as you all know, I don't spend time on that family. I don't see any reason to. Apart from anything else, I have no interest in them and their outcome each day of what they're doing. But I do, if what they do, or the people that they coerce to do things, if it impacts the Sussexes and their charities and their business, then I will cover it. And certainly all of the philanthropic endeavours that they have going at the moment, which are so exciting and delivering impactful work, over the coming months, I will be highlighting particular ones that have received grant funds in 2024, and we will cover some of those as well. All of them in some way, but there'll be some that are further along in their plans and working with people both in the USA and around the world. Some of them are doing really wonderful projects outside of the USA. So I think I shall bring it to an end on that front, because I was trying to sort of put out a framework of what's coming and why, and hopefully that will give some food for thought. But I will be in all of those episodes focusing more on the UK, because this is where I live, this is where I was born, but also the USA, because I have family members there as well. And the membership of this channel and the membership of Sussex channels generally, we're covering the 2 countries that appear, that have a number of people that live in the UK or USA that support the Sussexes. We know it's a worldwide support network, which is fabulous, but I couldn't do all of those countries if I tried. So I just decided to go for UK and America, but there are many, many more, and I'm sure they will feature in different future podcasts on different topics. So this is looking at the elite, and as I said, there will be some elements of the British royal family in there somewhere, but not too much. But they are there. They're definitely in things that I've written down for different episodes, just like the President of the USA and Vice President and their pals that they're mixing with. They'll also be mentioned from time to time, but I have to say I am more concerned with the wider population and the impact of the activities of a few that are not necessarily spending much time worrying about the majority, particularly when we talk about thousands of people losing their jobs overnight, no warning, no sort of time to plan, and the impact, the mental health implications, just to name but one thing, of so many people. And they've only just started. There's far worse to come. So, in terms of this podcast and that sort of setting out the table and giving you an idea of a framework of which I'm trying to operate so that I don't sort of spread myself too wide and too far that I can't do it justice. So that's the framework that we will be looking at over the next 4 to 6 weeks. I hope you find it of use, and I certainly hope that you will look at the articles in detail over the coming months and hopefully find something there that you want to research a bit more yourselves. So for now, it's bye from me. Bye from Ivy. Bye.